Welcome to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. We believe life is about how we react. Hey, welcome to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. Thank you for tuning in today. My name is Sean, and I'm glad you're here. Kyle, have you caught up from losing an hour not too long ago?
Man, I was so tired that day, because we recorded, and holy cow, I woke up and it caught me by surprise. I looked at the clock on the stove and it was an hour off, and yeah,
it's only been a week, but man, I still haven't quite caught up yet. Something triggered recently when it comes to hotels, and Kyle, do you remember a long time ago how we used to kind of talk about hotels specifically, leaving the soap and shampoo nowhere near the shower?
Yeah, they're just intentionally creating a totally dangerous situation.
Exactly. Well, in my research for some feedback from our listeners, I found a comment from Maria, and she is going to be our featured What Say You? We're going way back a few years ago. Maria left a comment, and I'll just kind of paraphrase. We were talking about hotels, and she let us know that what we deal with here in America is the same, quote unquote, the same in Europe. And she went on to say most hotel employees just aren't paid to care or think about the different nuances and struggles that people with disabilities are up against. And that's probably true. So, with that in mind, I took a trip last week, and although I won't totally put them on blast, the hotel I stayed at near LAX, wonderful service. The people were fantastic. But dude, I don't think I've ever stayed at a hotel with, a 4-star kind of brand that was literally falling apart in every single way.
Man.
The elevator buttons were missing in a couple of the elevators. The hotel shower, at least in my room, I went to turn the water on and the faucet lever came right off without any kind of pressure. The toilet paper roll, same thing. I barely touched it and it fell right off the wall.
Oh my!
I ended up moving rooms, and there was my second room there was a push button to operate the door so it open and close for you, especially if you're in a wheelchair. It didn't work, so it was a cool idea, cool concept, but not something you could execute and function. Down in the restaurant, legs were not on the tables, so tables were leaning, so just a hot mess. It was obvious that it's probably been a long time since this hotel spent a little bit of money just in those everyday maintenance things. But I will say, I was thankful that the service from the individuals is actually second to none. They were all sharp and helpful and accommodating, so I can't complain in that arena.
You know what? It sounds like the hotel from Schitt's Creek.
I haven't seen that enough to relate, but I get the feeling I can probably imagine what it's like.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure I could go on for days when it comes to reviewing hotels, but we need to roll right into our interview today. In honor of Bleeding Disorders Awareness Month, we wanted to bring this interview to you in the month of March. So, Max Feinstein, an incredible artist, creator, and so much more, sat down, and he's our featured conversation. Enjoy. Max Feinstein, you look just like you do in all your videos. I'm so happy that you're on our screen today. Max, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
It's my privilege. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Obviously, Max, you are obviously to me and Kyle, you're a musician. I think you look like a musician. I think you sound like a musician. Let's talk first about your music, what you've done, what you've accomplished.
Well, I've been a noisemaker for about as long as I've been alive. That
Nice.
tends to be how I sort of refer to it. But I've been primarily a guitar player throughout my career. I have been playing in any formal capacity on the guitar for a little over 20 years.
Wow.
I have been in a few dozen bands at this point. My career really led me down the studio musician, sideman way of working for a while. I would tour as a bandmate. I would tour as a session musician, a sideman, and I had been writing my own music, but over the years I had been more doing it in a portfolio sort of way and not putting a whole lot of investment into the presentation or brand, I suppose, of who I am as a solo artist until about 2019 when I put out an EP called Betamax and I needed a hook. The journalist I was speaking to try and promote it asked me, okay, so what's the hook? And I'm just like, all right, my blood doesn't work. I was supposed to stop playing guitar a decade ago when they diagnosed me with bone-on-bone arthritis in my right elbow, and I didn't stop, and here we are. Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
So in doing that, I kind of opened... it's kind of like a champagne cork because it was a pretty pressurized thing. I just hadn't really been talking about hemophilia a whole lot, but it became this point of advocacy, almost like a more subtle form of advocacy that was attached to a musical product rather than something more overt. So I kind of found my advocacy footing and my brand identity in that way. For a long time, I didn't want to talk about it because I said I had earlier that I was more of a band member or a sideman, so I was attached to someone else's project.
So when you were doing that kind of stuff, did your bandmates or other people around you, did they know that you were...
Yeah.
Okay.
That was a point of responsibility to me.
Sure.
Because when you go on tour, you're sharing your life with them for chunks of time at a time. And with a disorder like hemophilia, where you are actively managing it and may have some problematic episodes just by nature of it being something chaotic, it's important to let people know what they might have to expect. Because you really try not to make it anyone else's problem.
Sure.
Yeah. So what are some of those things where you say you've got to actively manage it? What does that mean exactly?
With hemophilia, you are periodically injecting things into your body. You are most commonly infusing medication into your veins. It's a self-managed disorder, which means I'm traveling with all sorts of sharp paraphernalia when I do. And if somebody is squeamish around needles and they don't know that you're going to pull one out and do what you got to do, it's important to be considerate of others when you're able to, because I'm sure there have been situations beyond your control as well with what you guys manage where you've needed to ask for help on things, and people see your disorder as this abstract thing because they don't experience it themselves.
Right.
So to dial people in to what you go through and what might be expected in case you can't really cover the whole thing yourself is pretty important. So what I would do is basically be kind of like, hey, guys, we're traveling. This is me. This is what I am. This is something that I have to do. It's not all that time consuming. It's not all that gross when it's managed. And when I have to do this, if it's not something you'd care to look at, well, I invite you to take a quick walk. It won't be more than 10 minutes if everything goes as planned.
Well, and you don't want them to think you're doing heroin or something, right?
Yeah, I had a worry about that once when I was traveling abroad for leisure in Denmark and was in a hostel and had to infuse, and sharing that room with many people,
Right.
I had some strange looks and some things lost in translation. I don't speak other languages all that well, but to speak a little bit more on like flare-ups, people who have played with me have seen me play through flare-ups. There was one situation in which I had a nosebleed that continued for days, where I was playing most of a set looking up at the ceiling to prevent the show from becoming a little more noir inspired or Alice Cooper inspired or what have you, because I didn't really feel like getting my clothes dirty that day and having blood pour down my face.
Jeez.
Billie Eilish wasn't popular yet, so that wasn't a cool thing to do.
So besides besides having to manage and inject and take care of that, you're dealing with nosebleeds on a regular basis. Your joints, I assume, are probably got to be in pain if you're having a flare-up. Are there other symptoms that you find yourself up against because of hemophilia?
Yeah, the disorder itself is one thing. Managing that, I'm fortunate to say I'm in a place where I haven't had a joint bleed in quite some time, which is the first time in my life I could really say that.
Awesome.
But the big thing, and I feel like anyone else will tell you the same, any other hemophiliac, is the damage over the years. Someone around my age in their early 30s would probably be one of the, an indicator of this sort of thing, because by 21, I was bone-on-bone arthritic from bleeding into my elbow so many times, and that's the part of it that is hardest to explain, because it's not an immediate sort of debilitation. It's a byproduct of a life lived with the disorder rather than an actual part of the disorder. So when blood goes where blood isn't supposed to go and hangs out there for too long, you deform the joint, you erode the cartilage over time, or there are little deposits that are left, and you have this extra calcium, so it starts to kind of partially fuse. And those are two things that I've had happen. My right elbow is, there's a hole in it, and we can talk more about that as time goes on, but my right ankle was my first real problem joint from my youth, from my childhood going forward, and that's gone the opposite way into sort of partial fusion.
I want to hear, just hearing you talk about all that, right? The pain, the discomfort, the outward side effects, the nosebleeds, whatever else you want to think about or describe. How in the world did you decide to keep playing guitar, or to keep kind of going up against the grind in that manner? I feel like some people might say it's not worth it, but obviously here you are still doing your thing. What has kept you on that track, I guess, or on that path?
Let me think about the right way to say this. It was a foregone conclusion to me that I was going to continue doing this. Making noise, being self-expressive in those ways is about the only thing I've ever cared to apply myself towards. Finding ways to be creative is, I guess you could say, that's sort of my life's goal. It's not always music. Sure. Sometimes it's cooking. I invented a thing. So, having ideas, finding solutions, or otherwise finding ways to express yourself is really what I live for. But with guitar, that was the first thing that ever made me feel like an ordinary person. I felt, and oftentimes still feel, a detachment from people. And that's a skill I've had to learn, is how to bond with people properly. And when you have a chronic condition that you're trying to get a grip on yourself as your brain is forming as a child, you're under a microscope. You are going through this complete cavalcade, this cattle call of doctors, of therapists, both physical, occupational, and psychotherapists as well. So you're meeting all of these people in a very sort of transactional way. You're meeting them because there's something fundamentally defective about you that they're trying to help you with, but you don't really know how to divorce that part of you from your own humanity, so it all feels more superficial or otherwise kind of transactional or temporary. So I had to figure out a way to bond with like my peers. That's the other thing, is that these are all people who are, they're adults. They're all grown-ups, and they're all kind of in charge. But with your own peer group, it's almost like you're wholly unrelatable. So a guitar, for me, was sort of that tool to feel like a little bit more of a person and a little bit less of a specimen.
Do you find that hemophilia stands between you and connecting with other people, and maybe guitar helps break down that barrier? Is that kind of how it is?
It's certainly become that way, because it often could be that people will hear my guitar before they hear my voice. And a lot of my advocacy has come at the end of the night after performing music, where I can sit down and have conversations with people. Oftentimes it'll start with a compliment or a discussion about what just transpired, and to go on and talk about hemophilia would happen almost naturally from it, because I've literally branded myself with it. One of my tattoos is a hemophilia medical alert tattoo, just as, again, another form of responsibility, because every hemophiliac has probably gone through a million bracelets, necklaces, all those other things. It may be the way that I move. Having joint damage may make it so that I'm limping some days a little bit, or that my arm is moving in a strange way. So a lot of things about me sort of beg the question, what is wrong with you? Sometimes it's the art, but sometimes it's the movement. Sometimes it's the things I say. It's usually the things I say that ask that question.
I really like the fact that you said people hear my guitar before my voice. For me, I think people see my wheelchair before they see me. And when people see my trike, they see the trike before the wheelchair. And they see the ability before the disability, I guess. And, they hear your guitar before your voice. They see your art before they see your defect or whatever in hemophilia.
Yeah, and I assume you're a lot like me in that when you're on your vehicle, when you have your tools at hand, you know that it could always be so much harder. There are some days, I'm sure, for you where doing what you love, doing what you need to do is far more challenging than other days. And you know that you have to kind of just go for it. You know that if you're up there doing that thing, if you're commanding people's attention or asking them to dedicate that kind of bandwidth to you as either a crowd or as participants in what you're doing, you owe it to them to function to the best of your ability, and sometimes even beyond that. That's, I think, the best part about, I suppose there's a phrase called musical athlete that I've been enamored with. My first voice teacher taught me that one. And when you think about what a musician's doing, if you're doing a 3-hour set and you're really doing a lot of stuff with your core, you're standing, at the very least, you're standing up for 3 hours straight, which is annoying some days, but you're also, if you're me, you're often up there screaming your head off, and you need to kind of push yourself through it. Any sort of athletic pursuit, it's a lot of craft, but it's also a lot of bravado.
Yep.
X, can you talk to us a little bit about performances? You said if I got it right, you kind of branched out 2019, started doing your own stuff, and of course we all know 2020, the pandemic happened. So when was the last time you were able to get on stage and be in front of a live audience?
It's my fortune to say that the last live performance I did was a couple of weeks ago. I've been back to performing, and I've been sort of easing my way into it. Not, a lot of people that I work with are in a place where they're sort of reassessing what they're doing too, because I'm sure, as it was for me, it has been for a lot of people, where when all of the obligations were sucked away, you reassessed just what your effort was yielding you. So I think a lot of people are being a little bit more conservative to make sure that what they're doing is not kind of overloading them or burning them out, so that they're just showing up without substance. So for me, getting ready to promote a record, I've been doing shows a little bit here and there to kind of really connect with other musicians, to connect with my community, to see where the local music scene is, because that went away for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And now that venues are starting to do things again, we're all kind of figuring out where we all stand.
Yeah.
And I love that. Like today, I'm going to go to a brewery after this and see a friend perform,
Nice.
and then hit up my favorite open mic, which hasn't happened in about 2 years. So I'm grateful for that.
How did you keep yourself in a positive place when you weren't able to go out and perform?
I didn't.
Do you mind talking about that a little bit?
Absolutely. And I should clarify by saying I wasn't exactly in a positive place before. It's one of those things where I've struggled through my life with mental health. I've been somebody who's let the rigors of life and the complications of his disorder overtake him. And based on a lot of things I internalized in my life, I came to a conclusion, and this plays into what I said earlier about why I didn't stop playing guitar, which was when we had this diagnosis, I was told that there was really nothing else that could be done for me, that they're just like, you should probably stop doing this. And I'm like, so there's nothing else? There's no better form of therapy? There's no alternate training or treatment regimen? There's no surgery they're going to do, because they wouldn't do a surgery. They wouldn't operate on my elbow because I was young. I still am young, so they still won't operate on it. And there wasn't really anything. It's kind of like I was bleeding into my elbow regardless. So if that was just going to be my life, I just decided to push through, because what else was I going to do? Just be miserable and sedentary? No, I was going to be miserable and overperform if I could. And that was not healthy. That was not a mentally healthy place to be. There didn't seem like there could be a place of good mental health while I was in a state of constant pain and agitation. So when the lockdown happened, as somebody who was making his money through events in one form or another, or through recording sessions, all of my work went away. I didn't just become somebody who telecommuted. The world effectively ended for me. And that meant a bit of an identity crisis, because I very much defined myself as the guy making noise on stage, or the guy with the recording studio. And to not have those things there was kind of problematic at first. And then it made me confront where I was, because I had nothing else to do but sit at home with my wife and contemplate my navel. So eventually I just got sick and tired of being sick and tired. And when doctor's appointments opened back up, because it opened up slowly again for certain things, they said, oh yeah, you can do in-person visits now. So I decided to go see a physical therapist. I had done it before when I was younger, to no avail, but I was in a better place with my body now than I was when I was 17. I was, a target joint was actively happening then, so rehabilitation was not great, and hemophilia was a lot harder to explain at the time. But fast forward about 13 years, and a guy my age who has hemophilia just happens to be a physical therapist in New Jersey. So that's kind of a unicorn situation,
Yeah.
So it kind of took the world ending for me to realize I needed to do something better for myself.
Yeah. Would you say you're feeling good today?
Yes. It's one of those things where I feel, depending on the day, I feel a connection to myself that lets me experience things without them consuming me. I had a professional setback. It was the week of Christmas. My building that my studio had been housed in for 10 years had a significant fire that displaced about 80 businesses and unfortunately took the lives of 2 artists. And so another thing that I had identified myself so strongly with was kind of removed from me, and the limbo of our equipment, because we were worried due to the lack of communication. Perhaps, like, we knew our equipment was okay, but we were legally barred from entering the building until all investigations, federal, local, and an inspection rather by the insurance adjuster was done, and we saw a demolition notice go in. So it was kind of like you couldn't put the crisis down because the crisis wasn't concluded until all of your stuff was out. So, I would say I still let these things get the better of me, but not often the best of me, which is a better place to be in. As far as physically, I'm in far less pain, far more capable. As you saw earlier, Kyle, I've taken up kickboxing, which is, that's me trying to challenge my arm to do more. I'm not trying to push harder. I'm not trying to hit, all that hard. I'm just trying to get more dimensionality out of it. I'm trying to get more connected to my body, because it's kind of like emotions. If you tune out your emotions, you tune out your sense of emotionality. And as a hemophiliac, growing up in the 90s and going even backwards from there, where it was all about just treating the body, the common theory was that you just sit at home. You sit, you wait for this stuff to resolve itself once the meds are in your system. But what you're really doing is just tuning out pain, and you're not really having a connection to your physicality. So that's sort of the pursuit. And I think that's a far healthier way to be.
Well, I'm glad you're doing well and back to producing music, and I'm excited for you. Like you said today, you're going to get out and do the open mic thing and just be around people and live music. That's got to be reassuring.
It's nice to be around people again in a capacity that is greater than when I left it. Pre-pandemic Max was not always very present because he was dealing with, again, a constant elbow pain or a shoulder pain from moving his elbow weird. So that takes you really out of situations, and it takes getting away from that to realize just how little of yourself you were giving to your relationships. So to be able to, to be around people again and have more of yourself to offer is a good feeling.
So just real quick, going back to the sort of mental health, you said you're feeling pretty good now. And was there a turning point? Like, was there a specific thing that got you to this place, or can you point to something?
I would say the record that I wrote over the quarantine lockdown was what helped me build out some healthier habits emotionally, was something that helped me explore productively these places that I either hadn't explored the right way or wouldn't explore. There was a lot of emotional walls that needed to come down. So to be able to sit there and pay attention to yourself and to be globally obliged to stay in, essentially, and do nothing else but contemplate the aforementioned navel was really what did it, was kind of being sick of yourself.
Where can people find your music?
They can find me on all of the streaming platforms, just under my name, Max Feinstein. I'm on Bandcamp, I'm on whatever is popular and convenient to whoever's listening. You can also find my visual work on YouTube, also under my name, Max Feinstein. I have the music video that I think we're all referring to is for a song called Borderlines, and that's one I'm very proud of. Yeah. It's my first real music video, and it was sort of a foray into better illustrating certain concepts.
It's emotional. Even knowing about hemophilia, I feel like even if you don't know about hemophilia, you start watching that video and you're like, oh, this guy's got some stuff going on. Very, very powerful.
Thank you.
Yeah, the whole video takes place in a windowless room with black walls, and there's like stuff everywhere, right? And it looks like you're creating and writing, but everything is very cluttered. Can you talk about like what all of that means?
Gladly. The shorthand I've been using for it is that I'm effectively rolling around in my own filth for about 5 minutes, which is, it's not a lie. It's not a lie. It's definitely a shallow takeaway, but the concept of it was something that came up through talking with the director, who is a good friend of mine. We've worked together on a lot of things before, but this is the first time she and I had really squared off on one of my own projects. And she had, when I had described the song, and Borderlines is the first song on the record, I see it's something of a concept album with arcs in it, and this is the one that sort of sets the stage for where the narrative begins. It sets you up with the premise, almost kind of like in those Star Wars movies where you have the text scrolling by, and then you're put just immediately into the action versus any real establishing scenery. So the song is about breaking inertia, essentially, and the effort that it takes to break inertia. And when I was describing it to Courtney, I had likened it to sleep paralysis, which is something I've experienced from time to time. And the way that I would get out of sleep paralysis, because I somehow in sleep paralysis, I'm aware that if I try to do something in a dream, I'm actually doing it in real life. So if I am trying to move my head, though paralyzed in that state, I'm actually shaking my head. And so the more effort I would put into doing that, the more likely it would be that I could jerk myself awake and get out of it before it got really weird. So that premise led to, essentially, I would say there are 3 different versions of me in this video. There's the one that's making the weird sandwiches and smashing things. There's the one that's on the ground, struggling to move throughout the video, and then there is the one in the place that we affectionately referred to as color world, which is sort of like the inner self, the one trying to push out, the one that can move and is trying to manipulate the outer self. So a lot of that, it comes from a place of frustration building and then releasing and then having to sit in the aftermath of having acted out. Because it's about negative habits versus positive habits in that respect.
I won't lie, you mentioned sandwiches, and when I first saw the video, I'm like, oh, cool, peanut butter and jelly. And then I thought, how many of those does he need? Because it was like 1 on top of 8. And I'm like, what is going on? So it took a second, but it all came together and made sense. And of course, we'll be sure to link that video and the music. We would love for our listeners to check Max out. Max, what I'm really wanting to hear you talk about for a moment. We know March is Hemophilia Awareness Month, and we're honored to have you a part of our March lineup. Like, how would you encourage somebody, whether it's they're up against hemophilia or some other condition, and maybe they're in a place that you've been in the past, how would you encourage somebody to continue moving forward in their life?
Get it out of your system. Don't worry about how you present yourself in the eyes of others. Articulate yourself to the fullest of your ability and the fullest of your imagination. You're going to feel better, and perhaps you'll find yourself with a unique take on the situation, which is what I did. I'm sure if my mother were around and she heard me refer to myself as a lifelong science experiment, she would not be thrilled about that. But at the same time, that is how I feel. That is the kind of thing I will happily say because I find it hilarious, because it's the truth. I've been tinkering with my personal physical chemistry my entire life with different medications, with different things for my mental health as well. It is literally an experiment of science with the advent of new technology. So the better you feel about how you're articulating yourself, the more connected you're going to feel to other people who are in your shoes. And there are plenty of people in your shoes.
Beautiful. Thank you.
That's really great. I like it a lot.
So, Max, before we let you go, you mentioned Redefine and this latest album. Tell us about when it comes out, where people can find it.
It's coming out at the end of March. It'll be out March 25th. And I'm sort of tying it into Bleeding Disorder Awareness Month because the hemophilia sort of makes it novel in the current events capacity. The record is kind of what my sensibilities have been leading up to. I've been describing it as something of a progressive grunge concept album, for whatever that means to anybody, but this is my story, and this is the story of either 7 years, 7 lifetimes, but more kind of like 7 seconds of my life through 7 songs. And the sort of cycle that I've gone through dealing with what goes on in my mind and how what goes on with my body has affected that. I'm really looking forward to it. They say in advocacy that you're sharing your story, and this is really the first time I think anyone in the community has shared a story, anything quite like this.
We are honored that you came on today to share a bit of your story and to tell our listeners and to us about your work as an artist, as a noisemaker, as a human, and just an all-around talented individual who is finding ways to love life despite the challenges and the circumstances that you are up against. We'll be sure to link your album and all kinds of other fun stuff in our show notes, so please, listeners, check Max out. And Max, keep doing what you're doing, man. We're excited to know you.
Thank you.
I really love talking to rare disease friends who are taking their situation and being like, all right, I'm going to make this good for someone else. You know, not only good for himself because he makes incredible music and really enjoys doing it, but he's paying it forward to others. And I really, really respect that.
Absolutely. When I was checking out his stuff on YouTube and even just some of his music catalogs, I got sucked in for a little bit. He's obviously a talented person who's got a lot going for him.
Yep. So, Sean, it's time to move on to our thank you notes. Who would you like to thank today?
I feel like you're telling me it's time because I rambled in the beginning. Is this your way of helping me get on with the show?
Trying to move things along here.
My thank you is actually going out to somebody at my gym. So for once, I've got some great feedback on an associate or an employee. Wow. But
Yay.
To be fair, this guy also works with me at my day job. He took on a secondary job, and I ran into him a few weeks ago at the gym. He picked this up because he's trying to buy a house, so he's just hustling to make money. This guy, although there is a bit of a personal connection, what's been really helpful is he jumps up to get the door anytime he sees me. But one thing that tends to take a moment is gaining access to the gym, right? You scan your barcode on your phone, and I can't walk and do that at the same time. Right. So I always walk in, stand off to the side, try to pull up my barcodes, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Well, without hesitation, without ever asking, he just, one day I walked in, he's like, Sean, I got you. You already checked in. He saw me coming and just typed in my name and, signed me in. And he's done that consistently every time I'm walking in and he's working behind the counter.
That's nice.
So he'll never know how much I appreciate that. Of course, I'd tell him, and I will continue to do so. But that little thing saves such, not even just a few seconds, but momentum in my walking, right? I don't have to worry about stopping and doing all that. So thank you, Jake.
And even just someone being like, hey, what's up? I see you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I feel like we talk about that. It's like somebody remembering your name, right?
Yeah. Agreed. So, your turn, Kyle. Who do you have this week?
So, it has snowed a couple times here lately, and it's been going back and forth between like 60 degrees and then like 25 degrees. And so, it snowed a bunch yesterday, and my neighbor came over, and she's like, hey, I'm cleaning off my car. Can I sweep yours off for you?
Hey.
Heck yeah, that sounds awesome. And then she's like, oh, while I'm at it, can I take your garbage out for you?
Oh, wow.
Yes, please. So anyway, just a really nice gesture. Two of my neighbors have done that multiple times for me this year during snowstorms. So really nice. Thank you.
That's your traditional Southern hospitality, it sounds like, right? Even though you're not in the South, those are the kind of neighbors everybody wants, right?
Totally, yeah. It's Northeastern hospitality.
I love it. Thank you. Well, like always, we encourage the listeners to do the same. Express some gratitude that helps keep us grounded and remember how even the small things make for a better life. So say thank you, send a text, write a note, even just journal some gratitude in your own life. We want to encourage you to check out our show notes. We've linked some information for Max and some of his music, so be sure to check it out. As always, we're grateful for you for listening and being a part of the show and the journey. We look forward to talking with you again next week, and until then,
keep living with urgency. Thank you for listening to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. This show is possible with your support. Visit twodisableddudes.com to donate.
Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app.